All right, folks, it is 6:35. I know that Aaron Esri won't be here, so we'd like to start the meeting, and I call it to order at 6:30. I'm going to say 33. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Paul, Storr, Esri, Furtado. Here. King. Here. Patterson.
Here.
Thorsland.
Here. Thank you very much. We have a quorum with 5 members present. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda and addendum. Moved by Kyle, second by Mary. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. We have the minutes of September 8th, 2022. Since I wasn't here, someone else needs to make that motion just to make it cool. To approve those, thank you, Chris. A second? Thank you, Stephanie. Is there any changes or additions? Or speak now? Looks good. Okay, all those in favor of approving those minutes say aye. Aye. All right. Public participation. I don't have any slips, but I do have people here who may want to talk. If so, raise your hand, and you can come up to the mic. Going once, going twice. Okay, if you change your mind in the next 30 seconds, wave your arms. So, because we can move you after communications. Do we have any communications for the board tonight? All right, last chance for public. And we're good? Okay, we're good. All right, communications and public participation are both closed. New business for information only tonight. John will fill the big shoes of Susan.
Yeah, so registration is still open for the residential electronics collection that will happen next Saturday. A few days ago, there had been about 75% of the slots taken, but that leaves about 500 still open, so there's a long way to go. And we'll keep that registration open right up to the event if there are open slots. So don't worry about missing your opportunity yet. It hasn't happened.
Okay, any questions for John about that event? Chris?
I don't have any questions, but I believe that this was kind of one of the last things organized by Ms. Susan Monty, who was had a nice article in the paper written about her in the past few weeks. And I should have brought that up under communications, but we sure thank her for her good work and wish her success in her second career.
All right, thank you, Chris. I agree.
And Susan has been kind enough to answer my questions while we've been finishing the preparations for this recycling. So she's been very helpful, as everybody has been, because I've never really been involved in this before. So we miss Susan, and you're right, that was a great article, a wonderful picture.
All right, very good. Yes, Susan is legacy will live for a long time here. Every time we do this, we will find out how much she did, I think. So, under new business, items to be approved by ELUC, we have before us 4 parts for the wind farm ordinance, and the vote tonight is whether or not we send those after some discussion to ZBA for continued public hearings. I know that this is coming back around for a second round. Just to remind you, we did pass parts of what ZBA recommended earlier, and that passed at the full county board, so now we're getting into more of the detail, I think. Let me know how you want to proceed with this. So, Stephanie?
I'd like to make a motion to consider 1 through 3 as an omnibus, but then to consider number 4 separately.
Okay, we have a motion to separate those out in case we want to send parts of it but not all of it. Is there a second? Second by, I'll give it to Kyle, but you were really close, Mary. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk about 1, 2, 3 then. This would authorize a public hearing on the text amendment. We have a handout tonight. John, maybe you want to tell us about this and the details of it. Some of it is very helpful.
Yeah, Mr. Thorsland encouraged me to ask Mike Hankard, who was, Hankard Environmental has been the sound engineer for a lot of wind farm projects, and he wrote a letter to this committee for the joint study session that happened on, I think it was May 30th at this point. And I commented to Mr. Thorsland that I really had no basis of comparison for the proposed cost of a post-construction wind farm noise study, but I knew that Mr. Hankard's firm participated in those quite often. So Mr. Thorsland encouraged me to ask Mr. Hankard if $34,000 was close or if he had a better recommendation. Turns out he does have a better recommendation. He recommends, and I know this isn't part of the first group, but if and when you consider number 4, based on Mr. Hankard's recommendation, I would recommend the fee for a post-construction wind farm noise study be established at $50,000. Now, he also made a markup of the amendment, and that's the markup that you have at your chairs. I agree with all of these comments. They're good comments. I'm very happy that he provided them. And so to the extent that you approve any part of these proposed amendment to go to public hearing, I recommend that you include it with the changes, or at least comments with coming changes recommended by Mr. Hankard in his markup.
Thank you, John. Yeah, if you go to page A2 in the handout, you'll see he's the blue, I believe, are all his edits. And yeah, he helped with some language there. Up at the top, add non-participating residents, which makes sense because that's what one of our chief concerns with this. That comment number 2.
Yeah, and I would just point out, he actually doesn't change anything that we proposed. He just points out where we overlooked some basic common sense provisions, like under the existing ordinance, our noise level doesn't say that it applies only to non-participating residences because it's the Pollution Control Board standard that applies to everything. But now that we're going with not simply following the Pollution Control Board, we have to be a little more detailed, and I'm glad that Mr. Hankard pointed that out.
Yeah, I would agree that at least that MH1 comment, that should be added. I'm trying to figure out what we would do with MH2.
Well, I've got a draft of MH2, and I want to run that by him because I'm not an acoustician.
Okay.
I don't even like to pretend to be one in a public hearing. So I would like the flexibility to, take to the public, if this is approved for public hearing, take to the public hearing changes that I support his comments.
And they would be made available to us when you know them.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is the board comfortable with that? I think.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that, but
Well, this is just this one particular instance here that we're talking about.
okay.
John would get some input from Hankard, and that would be part of what goes to ZBA. But we would see it first, but we wouldn't be able to vote on it because we would have already moved it to ZBA. And remember, it goes to ZBA, and there's lots of discussion there.
I'm fine with that. I did want to point out that comment MH4, and that one specifically relates to the one I separated out. And so we might also need to revisit that paragraph.
Okay. And that's part 4, right? That's the post-construction
Yes.
sound study.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
so-
it's not, no.
MH4?
No, it's under,
No, MH4 is under the post-construction verification, which is 3I6 at the bottom of page 2. That's where we begin what amounts to part 4 here.
No.
Stephanie has identified
No.
a problem with this.
yes.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
it's, the
Number
comment
4.
MH4 is in section 614I.
Right, and so number 4 on the agenda should actually be, in addition to revising section 933B6 to add a fee, under the way that the motion was made, number 4 would also include add new section 6.1.4C.
Okay,
or,
so we should have changed the agenda when we voted on it.
Yeah, it's 614I,
I, B, C,
I6.
and also there's 2 Cs. B, C, C.
Well,
E.
but that's not germane to
Yeah.
separating out the post-construction
Right.
noise study.
Yeah. So if the board is comfortable with sort of revising on the fly here, the agenda, so that that part 4 includes this part that we just discussed, which is the post-construction noise study, and not just the fee, but some of the details too, including comment MH4.
I'll amend the motion, the earlier motion.
Okay.
I'll amend it to say
Second from Chris, by the way.
that I would like to have 1 through 3, and I'd like to change it to 614IA.
Okay.
And then I'd like to say that 641.4I B through,
The end of it, right?
whoa, keeps on going, doesn't it? G be considered separately. Is that right?
Yeah.
The post-construction noise study is completely under 614I6.
Okay. And then 7 is complaint-based,
Yes.
and that,
I see. You're right. You're right. I
so
see.
then we would have to add a 5 to this, wouldn't we? To move that part, if we wanted to continue to have the complaint-based enforcement and things, and I don't want to drop that, because
Mm-mm.
that's part of the original ordinance, and that's not really changed that much, except for the fee there. So I think we need to make another part of the agenda that picks up at 7, which is on page A6. And we're dumping a whole lot on the table here. We've turned the agenda into a Scrabble game, basically. So. Does that make sense?
Okay, actually, you don't have to amend the agenda, but the motion would be on parts 1, 2, and 3, you would accept out of that 614I6, and then 614I6 gets added with what the agenda calls part 4.
Yes.
But if we do that, okay, so we go all the way down to 614I6, and then we begin part 4. And we carry the rest of that with part 4, correct?
Well, number 7 is actually part of part 3,
Okay.
and it needs to stay there because it's a part of the existing
Okay,
ordinance.
so it just takes care of the part we excerpted out.
Okay,
So when we're
I'm gonna try it
considering-
again. How about
Yeah.
this? I move that 1, 2, and 3 be considered as an omnibus, and that 3 be edited to 6.1I, 1 through 5 and 7. And then I move that 4 be considered separately as it is written, plus 6.1I 614I6.
Okay.
That work for you, Chris?
Okay, so we still have a second from Chris,
All right.
and I think we've detailed that out. All those in favor?
And we
Aye.
don't, if he accepts it, we don't have to vote again.
Okay. What we have. Okay, so back to discussion of MH4, Stephanie.
Okay. Well, wait, no, because right now we're just discussing the omnibus
Yeah.
ones.
Okay. So on the omnibus, there was some question about why did we decide to make the setbacks what they are now, and what was our scientific proof behind that, and we know who we're talking about. There's actually, I have some substantiating statements to make about that. What we're talking about is sound pressure, and what we're talking about is the attenuation of sound over distance. And the basic formula, and I'm not quoting from memory, I'm going to go right here. For every doubling of the distance, the sound level reduces by 6 decibels. As in, if you move from 10 to 20 meters away from a sound source, you drop 6. The next 6 decibel reduction means moving from 20 to 40. It's, again, a doubling. And then from 40 to 80 for another 6. And there's 2 analogies that I've heard. One is picture a balloon. And the balloon, you know, you can inflate, and it's small and it's big, but you don't add to the mass of the balloon. That's our sound. We spread it out. It's the same as if you've got a dollop of peanut butter and a Ritz cracker, or a dollop of peanut butter and a giant slice from the bread company. If you put the same amount of peanut butter or sound over the bigger area, it is thinner. Therefore, the pressure is lower. The sound is lower. So moving from our 1,000 and 1,200 to, what do we have, 15 and 2,000, or 1,400 and 2,000 is not a doubling fully of the distance, but enough to attenuate almost 6 decibels, about 5 actually. So it brings our 51 down close to 46 or 45. And again, the wind farm has to prove it's 45 if we do this. Mary?
So it says here on 1B that it's 1,600 feet. Did you mean that instead of 14? I don't know. So the attachment we got on our desk, that's the one we should be looking at, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it changes it from, it's highlighted as being at least 1,600 feet separation from the exterior above ground grades of a wind farm tower to any participating dwelling or principal building.
Right, that's a participating.
Yep.
And then 2,000
2,000 for non-participating,
Sorry,
right?
yeah, I misspoke. It was 16 and
Okay.
2,000. So we've made a concerted effort to listen to what the ZBA said. Now, again, they had 3,250, which is quite a distance. But we have lowered the sound pressure at a participating and a non-participating dwelling by default. If we have the same amount of sound from an existing one and we move further away, the sound is less. And there should be no argument about that. And again, the ordinance as it is written now and as it would be written both require that they have to do the modeling to prove that it meets the limit. And then we have a mechanism through complaint to test that again, and we may have a mechanism to make them prove that, although I have some comments about that later on. As far as the height, there are new wind towers going up in an adjacent county. They're at about 650. We're discussing raising them to 600 feet, and anything different than that would require a waiver during the special use permit. 500 feet right now is already maybe a challenge for the existing wind farm because they want to change the blades and make them about 26 feet higher than they are, and they would have to apply to make that change. But the current technology has taller towers. We've already addressed how to light these towers when they're taller by adhering to the FAA and, in fact, the advanced lighting systems. So we've taken care of the safety factor there. And in some aspect, the appearance factor, the advanced lighting is off until a plane approaches. That's what's nice about it. It's not always on. It's only on when needed. So we'll see what the ZBA does with that. And then the noise level has changed. Right now we use the Illinois Pollution Control Board, which is at 51 dB, and this would be 45. Am I quoting that right? We've talked about it so many times. I know it's in the 40s, but I was once in the 40s too, but that was a while ago. And again, they have to model that. And then sort of jumping ahead then into this part 7. Let's see. Where we get to 7, what's in there? This is the complaint-based testing, or the method to deal with complaints. Currently, we require that a number be displayed at every wind tower, and that's supposed to be maintained. And I guess, is that checked still? Because, yep, and as far as I know, there has not been a lot of calls to that number, but there's a method that they can reach the wind company. We did have one case where a post-construction study was done based on complaints. And most of that language has stayed the same, except for comment MH9, which John is going to address. And this is the part where it just kind of dropped off. And then in that is also the this discussion of the fee, which I believe we already passed. And this part is only about the fee for a post-construction wind study, which we'll deal with in the other part that we discussed, which will change, as John said, to $50K instead of the $34, based on expert advice. So is there any questions from John, or to John, or among each other, Chris, about what we're talking about so far?
I think Stephanie had a question first. Go ahead with yours. Well, thank you. This is a hard number, and it doesn't really take into account increasing costs over time. Do we anticipate that it'd be a problem?
Which number are you talking about?
I'm looking at on A7, number revised paragraph 9.3.3B6, and then the yellow initial payment farm study would be the same as the SUP fee, $34,000 or $760 per wind turbine tower, whichever is greater. And I'm a little concerned that having a number without that there may be increased costs, say 5-10 years down the road, and that this fee might not be sufficient. Did the consultant have anything to say about that?
Okay, as far as the fee goes for the post-construction noise study, he recommended increasing that to $50,000, and there is a provision which he did not recommend getting rid of. There's a provision that the wind farm developer has to pay if it's extra, if it's more than that, and we refund if it's less than that. So it's the only instance where our zoning ordinance actually, where the fee that it says isn't actually fixed. It can actually change.
if you read that full paragraph, you'll see it says, whichever is greater, and plus any additional fees for the amount by which the cost billed to the county exceeds the initial payment, or a refund of any unspent fee due to upon approval of the noise study. So,
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
I just had one comment, because I think some of the science comments were directed specifically towards me. I just want to say, if we were going to follow science, we would just adopt the policies of the Pollution Control Board. This is our attempt to respond to the concerns of the ZBA. So what we are doing is trying to respond to community concerns and respond to the concerns of the ZBA. If we were actually following science, it would just stay at the 51. So I just wanted to say that.
yeah, agreed. And then the other thing that comes up a lot that I will put on the record again in this meeting is the Illinois Pollution Control Board doesn't, there's been some comment that these levels have been static and that they don't account for wind farms and that they were based on, having the Clifford Jacobs Forge or something in your backyard. They do go through and update these. They're not a static instrument. They're also recognized in the state as the authority to handle this stuff. They're the people with agency to do this. And what we're doing with our proposed ordinance is becoming the agency to do this in Champaign County. I have a little trepidation about that. I want to hear what the ZBA has to do, because we did try to address the input that we got, then the really strong input from the public that did come to participate about that noise level. But in the end, we're taking on a task that we're not experts at and have to hire an expert to do it, when we have already an agency that does this at our disposal. Should we adopt those in the future instead? If this goes through ZBA and comes back, we'll see what they do. And then we will have to maybe make that decision afterwards if they come back with a denial again, to see what we do. So, to be determined. But that's a very good point, Stephanie. They sort of asked us to follow science and then asked us not to follow science.
I'd like to propose we vote on the 3 that are not the post-study ones.
All right, do we think we're ready for that? Okay, so a yes means we're going to send the proposal, including what John will come up with, some of the parts that are yet to be fully fleshed out, to ZBA for public hearing. And the schedule that John published in the notes was that the timeline roughly would be January, should we vote on it tonight, and it would come back to us maybe in June with a vote of the full board perhaps in August. So we've got a motion. Do I have a second? I'm giving it to Mary this time. Thank you very much. Without any further discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay. All right, now moving on to the post-construction study. I open it up to the board first for comments, and then I have some. John, you got this from, I think you found one state that has this, right? And that was Michigan? Did I get that
Minnesota.
right? Minnesota. And so a lot of this was gleaned from that. So thank you for finding that, because we kind of dumped that task in your lap without hardly any. And I think Chris was the original inspiration for this. So Chris, you also owe John a thank you.
I owe John a lot of thanks for putting this together. It was a lot more detailed than what I had in mind. And I just thank you for pulling this together. I know it was kind of a surprise thing, but I think it ought to address a lot of the concerns that of the people who live nearby.
Okay, any other questions right now? Stephanie?
Well, I appreciate the sentiment behind it. I want to make sure, I mean, that we're not, it seems striking to me that this fee is actually higher than the actual permitting fee. And my concern is this going to disincentivize wind investment in our county? And I totally understand what you were getting at, Chris, and I don't think that it's not important. I just don't know if this is the mechanism. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, by which, and it's whichever is greater. It almost seems to me that this would disincentivize small scale wind investment because in order to to get to this fee threshold, it would almost incentivize, like, it seems like we're only going to be doing wind investment that's that to scale up. So we're talking about a lot of windmills or a lot of wind turbines. I always say windmills, right? In order to recoup that sort of cost and aggregate it out across. So, I mean, I'm fine with that. I don't know, like, that might end up being something that the community wouldn't like. Like, it seems to me like this kind of structure would be saying we are open for wind, but only large scale wind, right? Like, in order to make it worth people's while. And it would disincentivize small scale investment in wind in our county. I don't really know if I know a way around that. I mean, I do think that they are responsible on the front end to do the modeling, and that there are some mechanisms to address that. I just wanted to say that was my concern. But I do think that this, in a weird way, like, incentivizes big projects or to be feasible.
Well, what is the cost of of a wind turbine? Do we know? It's quite a bit more than the application fee here.
Yeah, each turbine is a few $1 million at least.
When we were doing the current installation, my numbers, if I remember, it was about 1.2 per tower, roughly. This is what they talked about, and that was 30 towers. So they, between the construction costs and the material and the components, and I don't know if that factored in what the landowner contracts were, because they varied depending upon who the landowner was and how well they negotiated that. And we were not involved in the fee or the lease money. That's a private matter between the wind farms and those. But there was numbers that were not small, and the duration for these contracts was not short. So for the landowner that participated, it was not an unfair transaction for them to have it sited on property. So, and I'm sure that they continue to appreciate the little bit of farm ground and the large check that comes with it every year. So, but yeah, you're right. It's not a huge part of it. I agree with Stephanie, though. What we're, in a backhanded way, is saying is that don't bother us with your 20 or 30 towers. We're going to want the companies that want to put up 100 of them can amortize the cost of this post-construction wind farm study more than others, as well as the advanced lighting that we asked for, which requires a radar installation. And I'm told that this is about $1.5 million to $2 million to do the advanced lighting, and we've already approved that. So we've already put a burden on them in an effort to make this more amenable to the public, as far as some people don't like the lights at night. There's other lights, but wind farm lights apparently are different than others. There's more of them, I agree. Stephanie?
Okay, so I just did the math. 50,000 just seems like a lot of money to me when you just say it, but for 10 windmills, if you're right that it's 1.1 million, 50K would be 0.004% of the total project investment. I mean, it's negligible. I mean, it's not even, and that's like rounding up. So maybe my concern is, now that we've talked this through, as sharp as it was before. Just seeing $50,000 seems like a really hefty fee, but then I forget how expensive all of this is.
Yeah, and I think that 1.2 is exceeded now. That was 11 years ago? Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, did the recorder get Stephanie's figure on that? Hello? Okay, all right.
Okay, well, I have a few comments, if there's not others right at the moment, and I expect comments back on this. I'm going to break out the old statement that back in the dark ages, I was the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I was the chair temporarily during the original wind farm ordinance. I was on the ZBA for 10 years total. Did a lot of special use permits. And this is the only special use permit where we make people prove after the fact that they did what they told us they were going to do before the fact. It wasn't complaint based. And we already have a mechanism in here if there's complaints. We know that we had an instance with the current wind farm where the complaints led to a sound study, and it was done. And I believe the wind farm paid for that, right?
Please specify that was not in Champaign County, though.
That was in Vermillion, but it's part of the current one. Champaign County has not had a complaint-based study done or a complaint. We were very proud of the ordinance that we did, and ours was one of the more conservative ones at the time. There was other counties that just basically said, it looks good over there, and Ford, for example, and they practically hit each other in people's chimneys, and that may have generated what we see today against wind farm was poorly done. But we're still trying to make it better than it was. So I thought about other special use permits and what we would do. And in one particular instance, we had an event center, and there was a lot of concern about automobile traffic and accidents, and we made them do a traffic study. But we didn't make them do a traffic study after. We made them do it during the process, and they had to bring it to us before we approved it. We do this with the wind farm. We make them do the sound study, and they can't cite them without proving they're going to meet whatever our ordinance will say. You can say that we've done other stuff post, but it's always been complaint-based. It's never been based on a de facto performance study afterwards. We've done trucking companies, and we've had township road commissioners come and say, this is we're going to have all this truck traffic, and the road's not an 80,000-pound road. We've put conditions on the trucking companies or a fertilizer plant to deal with the traffic or the weight of the trucks, but we've never gone out afterwards and installed a scale and weighed the trucks going in and out, or made them prove that they were really only doing this much traffic, or unless there was a complaint. And then staff went out and did what they could to address the plate and inspected parking issues and things. We've had other event centers where parking on the road was a problem. We made them promise not to do that, but we didn't go out afterwards and make sure that they were doing that. We waited until someone complained that they were doing that. So I'm a little reluctant, and I realize, scaling out, that the fee is not probably what stops people from wanting to do this, but the concept that if we start making performance reviews post special use permit grantings, when will someone come in and say, well, you allowed the grain elevator in the dryer and you didn't put a sound limit on it, but there's a terrible sound, and I want them to pay for a sound study now, but we didn't make a mechanism to adjust that. The grain dryer's pretty loud. Mary knows. I've lived close enough to them too. I don't know that we need to send this to ZBA. I don't know if we need to put this in the ordinance. Personally, I don't think we do, because we already have a mechanism for when there's a problem or a complaint to go through the process of getting a sound study and doing it. Doing it by default is an expense, and it will take up people's time. And then what if it doesn't meet it? What do we do? What's our enforcement mechanism? They have to turn that one down. They have to feather it at night. They have to turn it off. They've invested 1.2 or more, $2 million in a unit, and then during some sound study, based on some expert, they're, within the fudge factor. My guess is what will happen, if it was ever done, was they'd say, well, it's 46.2, and it would be within the error bars of a study. And so we've spent a lot of money and spent a lot of time, and if you read some of the material, this takes months to do a proper sound study. It's not like we go out and hold up something and they have some results. It's literally months, because they have to get different wind speeds, conditions, directions, when towers line up with each other, different locations, and it's spoiled by a grain truck driving by or a thunderstorm or anything else. So my feeling is that we don't need to put this in there. I know totally where you're coming from, Chris. I think you wanted to assure the public that we care about it. I think we show that when we went off science with the Pollution Control Board, as Stephanie said, and went with a lower limit, even though we're not basing that on science so much as we're basing it on comfort. So that's just me, and I want to hear comments about it, because maybe I'm just dead wrong about it all.
Thank you. And you basically stated the case that I was making in proposing this, is that it would reassure the rural area, people that live in the rural areas, that the wind turbines were not exceeding the amount. And this is for a short time. It's not an extraordinary expense that would kind of cause somebody to not construct turbines in the area, because I think there's only a couple. They only have to do what is it, 2? Or how much? This is not for each turbine.
No, there are 5 locations required.
Five locations. Stephanie says this might deter smaller wind farm turbines, which I think people could come if they wanted to have a smaller farm, that they could ask for an exception or a reduction that would be considered. The concern, reasonable or not, is it can be easily demonstrated by a performance study, and I'm glad to see reference in the ordinance to ANSI and national and international organizations that are groups of experts that spend a great deal of time in studying and regulating and devising tests and so forth, and I've served on those committees. So I agree that it is kind of an exceptional sort of thing that we're asking, but I think in this instance it's going to be necessary, and if it turns out to be something that is unneeded, maybe we can come back and amend the ordinance accordingly. But I think in view of the extraordinary public concern, at least for the time being, that this will reassure folks that live in the vicinity. It's a long way around saying that restating what you'd already said, Eric, and I will support this, and I understand that there is a complaint mechanism, and that's sometimes it requires quite a bit on the part of the complainant to develop something other than I think I hear something. So I think demonstration in this case is a good thing, and the cost will be not very much for some of the projects that are underway or considered right now.
Okay, any other questions, input? Jeff?
I think you both make good points, so thanks for that.
You're welcome. And yeah, I understand both sides of this. Again, I think I'm on the side to say that I don't know that we need to send this to ZBA, and I will probably vote against that. I'm probably going to ask for a roll call on this because it might be close, just to not so much to get it on record, to make sure we get it counted right. So is there other discussion about sending to ZBA the post-construction?
I mean, not to be repetitive of what other people have said, but I think that we've established that the fee we're asking for is not a large burden on people who are, even if somebody wanted to do 10, that's $20 million. If they don't have an extra 50K, they should reconsider going into business. Obviously, there's been a lot of outcry about this. There's a lot of public concern, and I feel like the cost of this, not just monetarily, but is not very large, and I think but the ability to have transparency and to give public reassurance, I think, is huge. I do think it would be good if we did have insight on what is, if they fail this study, what is the next step, and how exactly that would work. But yeah, besides that, I mean, I'm supportive of this.
John, in the one state that you looked at, Minnesota, did they have a mechanism for if a wind tower proved to be over what it was modeled at? What was their remedy? And forgive me, I probably should have asked this question about 4 weeks ago.
Well, I don't recall Minnesota even suggesting that would be a possible outcome. I think they were confident that, and the Minnesota standards were included with the September agenda. They
I
never.
don't have those with me. What is the Minnesota standard for sound?
Oh, well, that's the other weird thing. The Minnesota Commerce Department is the department that requires the noise study, but they don't set the noise limit. The noise limit is not part of the policy that requires the study, and I didn't bother to hunt down what Minnesota requires. I think it might be, it's either 45 or 50 based on what, I don't have Mr. Hinkard's letter with me from the joint study session. I think he mentioned it in that memo that he wrote. They actually don't discuss that. Regardless of what Minnesota requires, if we have a special use permit that is verified to not meet the condition, that's a violation of the special use permit, and it needs to be corrected. You mentioned earlier several ways a wind farm could modify operations so as to meet the noise standard. And I assume that something like that would be required, because that is absolutely what we require for special use permits. They have to meet the standard.
All right, Stephanie?
Right now, under our ordinance, we are just under the Pollution Control Board, correct? So I want to be really clear. If we vote on this, what we voted on is reducing the amount of sound by 5 decibels and making them prove it after the fact to the tune of $50,000. So, like, what we've done is responded to the community concerns. If the ZBA votes it down, the noise level for allowable wind farms in our county would be higher than what we are proposing. And I just want to make sure that that's very clear, because I think, like, my concern is that even this isn't going to allay concerns, because they're going to say that the level should be lower. And, we can talk about that, and debate that. But if they vote it down, what it will be is higher without this proof mechanism. And I respect your concerns, but I think Chris and Kyle have convinced me.
Okay.
I just want to point out that the Pollution Control Board noise limit we're under now, when it is reduced to a single number, is 51. But as Mr. Hankard pointed out in his letter, the Pollution Control Board has 8 different octave bands where the noise is, and wind farms hardly ever actually get above 47. So the actual, I think it's a little more honest to say this proposed change is not actually 5 decibels, it's 2. However, I think it's also fair to say that that 2,000-foot separation seems to be more like a 42 to 43 decibel level. So from my view, the 45 isn't really what you're getting with these standards. I think you're getting a 43 or 42 just because of the greater distance. But the other thing you said is absolutely correct. All the comments we heard in the zoning case, everyone, even if there is a post-construction noise study proving compliance with a 45 dB limit, they're still going to say that's too loud. So it's not going to be satisfying anyone. It's going to be spending money for no satisfaction, frankly. But it's also going to be an improvement because you are actually lowering the noise limit. I think more than just 2 decibels.
Yeah, keep in mind that the ZBA came with 39. So, which is, I have some examples, both in sound pressure and sound level. And remember, when we talk about this, what we really are talking about is the sound pressure. It's not so much the dBs, but that's, the standards we go. So a regular truck, 50 feet, 40 miles an hour is about 90. A milling machine, garbage disposal in your house, when you're standing by it, is about 80. A passenger car at 50 feet is about 68. Conversation at 3 feet, unless it's the Esquire and it's a loud night, is about 60. An air conditioner window unit is 60. They talk about the quiet in the country. I invite them to spend a night in suburban Champaign. I would love to know what the average sound level is through the night on John Street and New, where I live, because it's not 39. I know it's not 39. My neighbor's radon pump is probably about 50 in my driveway. And so we're talking about a wind tower that is either 1,600 or 2,000 feet away at 45, which is quiet. 45 is quiet. We're probably louder in this room right now than 45. I don't know how many on the board have gone and actually stood by them. At night, I've been out to lots of these over many years now, in other countries too, big ones, small ones. And my opinion is they're not loud. I understand where we're going with this. I have a feeling that roll call won't be necessary because I'm going to lose. So I'll just take it. I agree, we're going to send this to ZBA, and it's not 39. So I have a feeling that it's going to come back with the same result, but I think we did what we needed to do. I think we did two things to mitigate a lot of stuff. We lowered the sound limit and we increased the distance. And Stephanie?
Just one last thing. I want to just acknowledge the tremendous amount of work John put into this. Like, as Chris said, this I feel like this committee, we're just like, here's a wild idea, and then you have to go figure it out. Thank you.
Yeah, and if, for those that weren't around for the original, I still have all the papers that staff generated for us, and it fills up more than one of those IKEA cubby squares. And that was before we got to the actual wind farm. That was just the ordinance and the input that came for that. So yeah, staff over the years, why you don't have wind farm PTSD, I don't know. It's a credit to your fortitude, sir, and everyone on staff. So I don't know if there's anything more to talk about this. So we'll just go with voice vote. Part 4, as we define in our arduous and difficult reading of the numbers and letters, to go to ZBA for public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? And it's unanimous, so we'll let it go. Thank you, you convinced me. All right, other business tonight. John, do we have any?
No.
Because I do not. I have no chair's report. Stephanie has a question. Good.
Do we have any update about the hazardous waste recycling center, the rest of the funding to match the ARPA? And if not, that's okay. Could we maybe get that before the end of the year? Just as finance chair, I'm trying to keep track of the reality of that coming into, we gave $600,000 in ARPA money for Susan's proposal. I just want to see where we are.
Isn't that a private group that we gave it to?
Yes, I guess that's true. But we ran it through this committee. It was under the water. It has something to do with this committee. It really does. If we could get like every 4 months an update on where it is, because at some point, if that project doesn't go forward, we have to decide, you know what I mean? We would have to reallocate that money, and we would need to make that determination by the end of 2024. So I just want to make sure that we don't get to the last minute and find out that the project, I have full confidence in their ability to do it, but I do think getting maybe a periodic update about where the rest of that fundraising is will be important. And we did approve it underwater. It had something to do with this committee.
I know some of the people on that, from that group, and they are actively searching for additional monies. And
All right, there are no items to place on the consent agenda. So at exactly 1 hour later, I call this meeting adjourned at 7:33. Thank you, everybody, especially John and Mary and the rest of the staff.